All right. Good morning, everyone. We'll go on the record. The time is 10 o'clock. It is April 5th, 2022. This is the hearing for Clatsop County case file 22-000134, which is a request by Kenneth and Tina Brundage for a variance to a side yard setback in the RA1 zone. My name is Tommy Brooks, and I'm the hearings officer presiding over this hearing. Before we begin, let me say a few words about the format of the hearing and how we're going to proceed. We are conducting this hearing using audio and video conferencing with participants each appearing from a remote location. We will still follow the normal hearing procedures, and I will provide sufficient opportunity for everyone to participate at the appropriate time. It is possible that I may have audio or video issues. If that happens, please be patient. I'll just be calling back in so that we can continue. You will be called on individually when it's time to make your comments. So please wait until you are called. Before you begin your comments, please state your name and your address for the record. My role as the hearings officer is to either approve, conditionally approve, or deny the application for the variance. All participants are allowed to provide new facts and arguments during your live testimony as part of this evidentiary hearing. If you have written comments, please provide those to staff so that they can be included in the record. In rendering my decision, I will consider only the factual evidence that is in the record. I will then apply those facts to the applicable criteria contained in applicable provisions of the county's comprehensive plan and land use regulations. The criteria were identified in the public notice that announced this hearing. They are also set forth in the staff report. The county's code requires that I state the substantive criteria at the beginning of the hearing, and those are as follows. The code section 2.8000, which is a variance, 4.2500, which are the residential agricultural RA1 zone regulations, 4.4200, open space parks and recreation zone, 5.1000, flood hazard overlay district. It is important that you direct all of your testimony to the applicable criteria. If you believe a criterion applies that was not listed, you may address the unlisted criterion. However, I do urge you to explain why the criterion must apply so that others can respond and so that I can address that criterion in my decision. The failure to raise an issue with enough detail that enables me or the other participants to respond precludes your ability to appeal that issue to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Also, the failure to raise a constitutional or other issue related to the proposed conditions of approval, again, with enough detail to allow me to respond to the issue in my decision, precludes an action for damages in circuit court. As I just noted, I serve as the county's hearings officer. While I have a contract with the county to serve in that role, I am obligated to remain impartial. To that end, I'll go on the record to state that I do not know the applicants. I have not visited the site, and I do not have any ex parte contacts to disclose. The hearing will be conducted in the order that I'm about to go over. I don't anticipate setting time limits for anyone's participation, but I do reserve the right to do so if it appears there are many participants. Also, if you are not addressing the criteria, I may interrupt you and have you address those. So please keep your comments focused. The order that we're going to go in is we'll have the staff do a staff report. The applicant will be allowed to present their case. That'll be followed by those who are in favor of the application other than the applicant, and then those who are opposed to the application. After everyone's gone, I'll give the applicant a chance to come up and provide rebuttal to anything that was said in opposition. And then we'll conclude with any staff comments or questions that I may have to the staff. Before we begin, does anyone wish to challenge my ability to hear this matter or to challenge the county's jurisdiction over this matter? All right, seeing or hearing no objections, we'll move on to the first step, which would be the staff report.
Thank you. I'll be presenting the staff report today. My name is Gail Henriksen, Clatsop County Community Development Director. My address is 800 Exchange Street, Suite 100, Astoria, Oregon, 97103. I do request that our staff report and its exhibits dated March 29th, 2022 be entered into the record, as well as comments we received yesterday, April 4th, from William Sherlock, who is the attorney or legal representative for the property owners immediately to the west of the subject property. To summarize the request, the applicants are requesting a 40-foot side yard setback variance to the minimum required 50-foot side yard setback. And this is required when a property is adjacent to a resource zone, which includes the open space, parks and recreation zone, or OPR zone. If the variance is approved, the applicants are asking to be able to construct within 10 feet of the west or side property line. 10 foot would be the minimum setback that we would typically require in the RA1 zone. The applicants are proposing, if approved, to construct a 2,232 square foot dwelling with an attached 528 square foot garage. In addition to the requirements that the county has in developing the property, there are supplemental covenants and restrictions that are imposed by the River Ranch HOA that do further restrict development on the property. And those include a 16-foot height limit, a 1,000 square foot minimum dwelling size, and a maximum 120-foot setback from the road. And without the variance, the applicants have stated that they could only construct an 875 square foot dwelling. The property itself was platted in September of 1977. The lot is approximately 110 feet wide by 250 feet deep, and that equates to about 0.63 acres. It is zoned Rural Agriculture 1, RA1, which currently requires a 2-acre minimum lot size. And the subject property is also located in a special flood hazard area, but in 2006, FEMA did approve a letter of map amendment that did remove the property from that special flood hazard area. Currently, the property is vacant except for a septic system that was installed in 1980, and that septic system is located on the southeast corner of Lot 1, which is the subject property. At the time that the application was submitted in 1980 for the septic system, the DEQ staffer at that time stated that because of the high water tables in the River Ranch subdivision, the drain fields for the septic system could only be located in areas in close proximity to the roadway. And the drawing that was submitted by the DEQ staffer suggested locating that septic system and drain field in the southeast quadrant of Lot 1. And that was agreed to by the property owner at that time in March of 1980. It should also be noted that at that time, the 50-foot setback from the west property line was not in effect. That came into place in 1984 when the county adopted a definition of resource zone and stated that the open space parks and recreation zone was included as a resource zone. Prior to 1984, there was a 50-foot setback, but there was no definition of what constituted a resource zone. So at the time the property was approved for the septic, it would have been with the understanding that a 10-foot property line setback from the west property line would have been in place. In terms of the variance criteria themselves, there are 7 criteria that must be met under section 2.8000 of the Land and Water Development and Use Code. The first one requires that there has to be some sort of proof that's exceptional and extraordinary that applies to this property and that does not apply to other properties in the same zone or vicinity. And this exceptional or extraordinary circumstance that's been identified by staff relates to that high water table and the placement of the septic system that occurred in 1980. Because of that water system again, or water table levels, the owners at that time were restricted in where they could put their septic system and relied on the advice of a staff with the Department of Environmental Quality about where that system should be located. The subject property itself is one of only 7 remaining vacant parcels within the 48 lot River Ranch subdivision. And only the subject parcel and the one immediately south of River Ranch Road opposite the subject parcel are subject currently to that 50-foot side yard setback requirement. There has been a permit issued for that south lot that apparently was issued in error by the county and did not require that minimum 50-foot setback. And so the owners of that house do have a 10-foot setback. So with regard to variance criteria A, staff has found that the factors that are in place, the high water table levels, the location of that septic system based on staff recommendation and guidance in 1980, the requirement for the 50-foot side yard setback that was adopted subsequent to that, and then the restricting factors from the HOA are not items that were created as a result of actions taken by the property owners, and staff has found that this criterion is satisfied. Criterion B relates to whether or not granting of a variance would be injurious to the neighborhood or community, and whether or not it would be detrimental to public welfare or to public safety. And so what's being proposed for the property is typical for the RA1 zone. It's a single family dwelling with an attached garage. As I stated earlier, the property was removed from the special flood hazard area by FEMA in 2006 via letter of map amendment. And we would recommend one condition of approval to ensure that any future development of the property would not be harmful to the surrounding neighborhood. And that is a condition that the applicants would adhere to all requirements for erosion control and stormwater control before, during, and after construction, and that there would be a requirement to revegetate the site once construction is completed. And the reason for that is in the staff report, there are pictures of the subject property. It's a relatively flat site. There's little vegetation on the site right now. And so to minimize stormwater runoff and silt runoff from the subject property, we would require the use of erosion and stormwater control best practices. You'll see in the comments that were submitted by Mr. Sherlock that I forwarded to both the hearings officer and the applicants this morning, that there are concerns that allowing a single family home adjacent to their open space parks and recreation property would not be compatible with the intent. And Mr. Sherlock has noted that the septic could perhaps be removed or relocated to the other side of the property. And while it could be possible to relocate that septic, and because it is underground, it could be located much closer than 50 feet to the property, because the setback would apply only to structures 30 inches or more above grade. It still seems that that would be incompatible, because there's, more environmental concern if a septic system should fail that close to a park or recreation property. Also, it should be noted that with regard to impacts to the property to the west, that that property, even though it's zoned open space parks and recreation, does allow for a variety of uses, several of which can be quite intense, including public or regional parks and recreation areas, golf courses, RV parks, and marinas, boat launchings, and mooring facilities. Staff has concluded that a single family dwelling on the subject property would neither prohibit nor impact potential recreational uses on that adjacent property. And therefore, we have found that this criterion is also satisfied with that condition of approval regarding erosion control and stormwater control. The third criterion is that if a variance is granted, it would not allow a use to be established that is not permitted by the ordinance, or would not confer on the applicant any special privilege that would be denied to other property owners in the area. And so the property is zoned rural agriculture 1, and the primary use that's permitted in that zoning district is a single family home. And so therefore, if the variance were to be granted, it would not confer any special privilege on the applicants, and would not confer any special privilege on the applicants. And so therefore we have found that that criterion is also satisfied. The fourth criterion deals with the proof of significant hardship and the results that would occur if the variance were not to be granted. And the burden is on the applicant to show that basically without relief from the requirements of the code, that there would be no reasonable use allowed of the subject property. And so as we stated earlier in our report and in my presentation, the physical hardship that staff has identified is associated with the location of the water tables in regard to the subject property. And it's because of the location of those high water table levels that a cascade of events has occurred in a way that the property owner at that time was given guidance to locate the septic in a certain portion of the area with the assumption that the 10-foot setback that was currently in place on the west property line would always remain so. However, 4 years after that permit was granted and the septic was installed, the county did change its regulations to add that definition of resource zone, which then applied the 50-foot setback to the west property line of the subject property. And again, while the septic could be located closer to the west property line, staff does not believe that that would be consistent with the intent of the OPR zone, which is really to protect and allow for preserve land for open space and recreation, and to protect any lands that are designated as scenic or natural areas in our comprehensive plan. The property to the west is not designated in our comprehensive plan, but still could be used for park and open space. And therefore we would still want to make sure that any environmental impacts that might occur from relocation of the septic system closer to that property would not happen should the system fail. And again, basically without the variance criteria, the applicants have stated that they would be limited to an 875 square foot dwelling. And under the River Ranch HOA, they're required to have a minimum 1,000 square foot dwelling. So they would not be able to meet that requirement. The HOA covenants and restrictions further restrict building height to a maximum of 16 feet. So they're not able to make up that minimum difference by raising the building elevation. So without the variance, there's really nothing that the applicants at this time could construct that would comply with all the regulations that sit on top of the property and respect the location of the water table. So we have determined that this criterion is also satisfied. Criterion E states that the variance necessary is for the reasonable use of land, and that the variance granted by the hearing body is the minimum variance that would accomplish this purpose. And so again, without the variance, the applicants have stated they could only construct an 875 square foot building, which would not comply with their HOA requirements. They have stated, however, that it might be possible with a 20-foot setback, which would be a 30-foot variance instead of 40 feet, that they still could construct a smaller house. However, there is a question of equity in terms of the housing sizes that are located in that subdivision for homes that have already been constructed. And several of these properties within the immediate area have been detailed in your staff report, including square footage and year built. And all of them are all over the 1,000-foot minimum, and many of them are well above 2,000 square feet. So staff believes that this criterion has also been satisfied. Criterion F is in regard to whether or not the hardship that's been identified has arisen from something that is a violation of the provisions of the ordinance. And there are no code violations on the subject property. The hardship, which is the location of the water table levels, is not a violation of any ordinance. So this criterion is satisfied. And then the final criteria has to do with whether or not the applicants could use adjacent land that they also own in order to accomplish what they want to do development-wise. In this case, the applicants do not own any adjacent properties, and so therefore this criterion is not applicable. In summary, staff has recommended approval with a condition. We find that all of the criteria A through F can be satisfied. Criterion B can be satisfied with that condition. And criterion number G, or letter G, is not applicable to the subject property. We did have 2 public comments on this property. One was from Virgil Ray, who stated basically that the owner should have done their due diligence prior to purchase of the property. He also stated that he had had the opportunity to purchase the subject property, but decided against it due to the rules of purchase next to a resource zone. And then we do have comments that were submitted this morning from William Sherlock, who is the attorney for the adjacent property owner to the west. And I will not read through all his comments, but his basic conclusion was that the variance is not necessary to allow development of the property, and he is requesting that the variance be denied. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. I think I do have 2 questions for you, and some of this may be directed to the applicant as well, but on some of the figures that I've seen in the record, there's a pretty significant setback shown from the river. So I believe on the north side of the property. And I was trying to figure, I think your staff report indicated that the rear yard setback is like 20 or 35 feet. What do you know what the limit for how close the house could be to the river is?
Yeah, so under, as I understand the HOA restrictions, owners are required to build within 120 feet of the road. So in this case, their property is 250 feet deep. That would require them to be 130 feet from the river. The county's code itself only requires a 20-foot rear yard setback, and so they could theoretically build as 20 feet from that north property line.
And sorry, I guess so the 120-foot setback from the road, that's on the south end. So that pushes the house to the north, but the only limit on terms of how close it can get to the river is 20 feet.
So under the county's codes, yes, they could build 20 feet from the north property line. But under the HOA's rules, as I understand them, and they do have a representative here, the furthest the building envelope goes from the south property line is 120 feet back. And then the land that's north of that 120 feet from the road is to remain open and natural, and that's to preserve views, as I understand it.
Okay, yeah, I'll probably address that question to the HOA then, or to the applicant. I'm just checking my notes. Okay, actually, I think that's the only question I have for staff at the moment. I might have questions at the end of this, but we can proceed with the applicant if the applicant is represented.
Tom, can you hear us?
It's a little soft. Who's speaking?
Steve Peterson. Tina Brundage works for me. We're at my office in Rainier.
Okay.
Let me turn it up a little bit. How's that? Is that better?
I think I can hear you now. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Shoot. Oh no. It'll get back on. There. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Generally speaking, I believe the applicants are in total support of the county's.
Sorry to interrupt you. Would you mind identifying yourself again and give your name and address for the record?
You've got Stephen Peterson, attorney at law, 612 West B Street, Rainier, Oregon.
Thank you.
Generally speaking, the applicants are in favor of the report and the conclusions of the Clatsop County, and basically are fully aware of what they need to do as far as item B. and they're willing to do that. I mean, if you have any questions of the applicants, they're here to answer any and all questions.
Okay, anyone else on behalf of the applicant before I ask questions?
Yeah, my name is Tom Crowder. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of River Ranch HOA.
I'm
My
sorry,
address is-
Mr. Crowder, are you representing the applicant or are you representing the HOA?
I'm sorry, the HOA, I thought that's what you were asking for.
Sorry, just for the applicant at the moment. And you guys are, your mic is muted.
My name's Jeff White. I live at 91638 Columbia River Road, which is in River Ranch. And I too am representing the River Ranch Homeowners Association.
Okay, Mr. White, 1 minute. This is the time just for the applicant to go. And I'm asking if anyone on behalf of the applicant has anything else before I ask my questions of Mr. Peterson or the applicant.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay, I'm Kenny Brundage. My address is 1310 River Road, Unit 5, Longview, Washington.
Go ahead.
What?
Well, we're in agreement with
Oh,
the decision from the county. We worked very hard on trying to show the facts in this case. And they have also agreed with the information we have put in to the county. Don't see any reason why this would be a hardship on anybody else besides ourselves if we were not able to have our variance approved for our home. We did bring in people from the HOA to answer any questions that you have as to the setbacks or the feet that we have to build with. Our septic was put in prior to this zoning, and nobody was aware that I was aware of that the zoning even existed, including the property owner directly behind that sold us that property. She was able to build her home on the OPR zone with a 10-foot setback in 1990. And at this point, we are the only ones affected by this. And there is nothing that I or anybody can see that we would harm that property by building within 10 feet of the boundary line.
Okay, thank you. I do have some questions for the applicant. And so I guess I'll direct them at Mr. Peterson, and then you can let me know if someone else is better to answer the question. Along the same lines of what I asked staff, I'm trying to figure out what the basis is for the figure that was Exhibit 1 was included with the application. And it's a nice figure that shows sort of the various setbacks in yellow, and I think leaves the developable part of the property. But I'm trying to figure out what the source is for that setback that's to the north, off of, closer to the river. It's pretty substantial, and the code appears to require a much smaller setback. And so if I understand it, I think the setback must have a source somewhere in the HOA rules. But the only HOA rule that I see is a setback required from the road and so I'm just trying to figure out if you can walk me through, that figure, why I understand the OPR setback. I'm trying to understand the HOA setback.
Has to do with preserving the
I would
views.
like Tom Crowder or Jeff White to answer that question.
Could we have representative of HOA answer that question?
I will let them speak to that if they want to when it's their turn to provide testimony. It's a question I have for the applicant. So if you don't have an answer, that's fine too. Just trying to.
The protection of the views of the other residents of the HOA. So the side views, there's not only a height restriction because of the views of the people behind that not on the riverside, and the riverside has that extra restriction to protect the side views of the other property owners.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have for you, and this might be reflected in some of the public comments that were received this morning as well, is whether or not the applicant has explored the idea of getting a variance from the HOA rather than a county?
We have discussed that with the HOA, and we were advised that they would not be making any changes to the rules.
The other question I had for you in terms of how the application is structured is there was a lot of focus on the garage. What I couldn't tell was if the garage is an actual requirement of the HOA rules, or it's just a desire of the property owner to have that.
It's a desire.
Yeah.
It also keeps the neighborhood cleaner by
Yeah.
being able to store all your belongings and boats and kayaks and
I know the neighborhood would benefit if we don't have belongings sitting outside on the property, rather stored inside, to help with, again, views and again, making the neighborhood nicer.
And my last question for you guys is about the septic system. I was just trying to get a sense of the history of it. I mean, it looks like it was constructed in the 80s and then repaired again recently. Was that repair part of, did that happen before you purchased the property, after? What, do you know the history of why it was repaired, if it was presumably not used, sort of what just kind of an overview of that?
Prior to purchasing the property, we, as part of a requirement, we wanted to make sure we could get a permit for the repair, which the septic's actually brand new, but it had a steel tank. And so we did get a repair permit, and we put a brand new concrete tank in there, and everything was inspected and approved by the county. So we did put the tank in after we purchased the property, but we made sure we had a permit prior to purchasing the property.
Yeah. Thank you. That helps.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's all the factual questions I have for the applicant. So the way we would proceed now is anyone who's here to testify other than the applicant that is in favor, expressly in favor of the application. Is there anyone signed up for that purpose?
Yeah, let me start again. My apologies for jumping in there too soon. My name is Tom Crowder. I am the Secretary Treasurer for River Ranch Homeowners Association. Also logged on as Jeff White. He's our president. Historically, I probably have the best history of River Ranch because of what I do for River Ranch. I've been doing it for several years. As stated, River Ranch was developed in 1977 with all the plots being approved. And so the Brundage's lot was approved to be built on back during that day. And then of course the OPR came around in 1980, which restricted them down, which frankly nobody in the neighborhood even really knew about it. I've talked to a lot of people out here, and Virgil Ray says that he tried to purchase a property. I'm not so sure about that, but anyway, that doesn't matter. So to reflect on some of the restrictions that the HOA has for the river lots, which is block 1, block 2 of River Ranch, which is basically any house that has river back, the north side of their property is the river. They cannot build any higher than 16 feet in height. They have a 10-foot setback from the other property on either side. They have to be at least 10 feet from property on either side. They have to be 120 feet from the road. They can't build any structures any closer than 120 feet from the road towards the river to the north. And that is so that the houses to the side of them, their view doesn't get restricted because you built your house too far forward and they can't see up or down the river. These were put into place back in 1977 when the forefathers of the HOA were looking at how they can make this beautiful place to live, which it is. We historically don't get any traction on trying to change anything in our DCNRs. It's a fight from the moment you start to the moment you end. There has to be 75% of the property owners have to vote for it, which getting that many people to vote for anything is almost impossible. So when they asked us about changing, some of the rules in order to allow that, the answer is no. It's just not going to happen. We would have to change the rules, which probably wouldn't happen to begin with, and it would be World War III out here anytime you try to build a two-story house or go further than the 120 feet or change any of those restrictions. So the Brundages are really in a pickle when they found out that there's a 50-foot setback. Again, nobody even knew what an OPR was until this took place. And then, of course, now we know all about it. And they are the only property out here now that will be affected by it. You got to keep in mind as well that River Ranch is a closed community by gate. It is private road coming in, so there's no public access back to this property. And the Caramonas do own the property, and they can do whatever they choose to. The OPR that is zoned out there, 90% of it is swampland. So the only piece that comes into buildable property is next to the 2 units we're talking about, with the Brundages and the property due to the south that's already been built. The rest of the OPR basically incorporates stuff that floods every year and would never be allowed by the county to be built upon anyway. So, unless you have some questions for me as far as the HOA goes, I'd be happy to answer them.
I think the question I have, and I think I understand that, the 120-foot setback is actually not that they have to be set back from the road 120 feet, is that everything has to be within that 120 feet.
Yes, that is the maximum that they can build towards the river.
Towards the river. Thank you. That's the
any structure whatsoever, including decks or anything like that.
Okay. Mr. Crowder, I don't have any further questions for you. So
thank you.
Anyone else that's in favor of the application?
Hi, I'm Jeff White, 91638 River Ranch. The view is what it's all about here. If we were to change the DCNRs, there are 2 undeveloped properties beyond this property in the front that would be allowed to violate our current rules in the DCR. And we're actually doing a walkthrough to a view protection walkthrough on Saturday. The board members are, and we want every year or two, we walk through the community looking for obstructions, trees that have overgrown the 16-foot height or substantially obstruct the view of the people in the back. This place has always been about the view. As far as the Brundages, I can't understand why they cannot build there. It's I've read through the documents, and I'm at kind of a loss how they're being forced out of the use of their property in this manner, but that's what the proceeding's about. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. White. Is there anyone else who has signed up or is here to speak in favor of the application? Okay. Is there anyone who is present who would like to speak in opposition to the application? Doesn't look like any. There's one phone number that's dialed in. I don't know if that person is, if that's
Yes, this is John Karamanos. We made our comments earlier. I just wanted to listen in and see what was going on with this, and I don't have anything else right now.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to, I guess, back to the applicant for any rebuttal to anything that you heard from the other people providing testimony. I think I do have one other question for you if you don't have any comments.
I believe the applicants don't have any comments concerning rebuttal.
Okay. So Mr. Peterson, I'm going to address this question to you because I think it's more of a legal question rather than a factual one. It might be a mix of the two. The part I'm trying to get my head around is sort of the self-imposed hardship element of the county's code. I'm let me make sure I get the right citation. I believe it's 2.80103D. One part of that language says that the hardship cannot be created by one who purchases the property with or without the knowledge of the restrictions that are present. It's one of the, probably the only area that I didn't see directly addressed in the, either in the application or the staff report. I'm just curious if you have a sense of, I guess, more of what your legal argument is whether or not this hardship was created by someone who purchased the property with or without the knowledge of the restrictions present, and how I should address that in a decision.
Well, number one, obviously, the Brundages did not create the hardship, as indicated by Mr. Crowder. Nobody out there knew about this OPR zone. They were unaware of it. The property was zoned with a 10-foot setback back in 1977 when it was platted. So it has created a hardship, but the hardship was not created by the Brundages. I don't know if I answered your question.
I'm trying to get one more layer deep in that, because so the language says, nor can it be created by one who purchases property with or without the knowledge of the restrictions present. So I understand factually, I can accept that the purchaser wasn't aware, but of the restriction and the setback. I'm trying to figure out if that's meaningful in light of this code language, and if there's an alternative reading you can provide me for that code language about what it means that the restriction can't be created by one who purchases the property without knowledge of the restriction.
That's a good question. Well, let's take a look at the hardship first. Number one, the hardship, if the 50-foot setback stays in effect, they can't build a house out there, bottom line. That's the hardship. They can't build their 875 square foot house because there's a minimum built site of 1,000 square feet. So that's the hardship. The next question is, how does that affect when they purchase the property without the knowledge of the OPRs? Is that your question?
Basically, is if they didn't have knowledge of it, but they purchased the property with that restriction, is that does that fit into this code language that says I'll admit it's kind of oddly worded, but it says, nor can it be created by one who purchases property with or without the knowledge of restrictions present. So the focus of the code seems to be that the knowledge of the restriction is not material. And so that piece I'm not really focused on. I'm focused on whether or not that means the hardship was created by the purchaser.
Well, it obviously was not created by the purchaser. It was created when it was zoned OPR back in the 80s, 84. I think the bottom line in this case is you've got the Karamotas that have property that's not even developable out there. This variance would have no effect whatsoever on the use of that property in that zone. And quite frankly, that OPR zone would have, a bigger effect on the property with golf courses, RVs, and all the other sorts. And this particular house built has. And quite frankly, it has no bearing on the OPR zone, has no effect on it. And my position is it should be granted.
I do have that prompted one other follow-up question I had, since you mentioned it, about the setback, and the applicable criterion is that it's the minimum setback that's required. That's 3E, I believe. I understood from the staff report that a smaller variance might allow more development, but has the applicant determined how big the house can be if, for example, the setback was 20 or 30 feet versus 40 feet, the 40 feet variance?
I'll let the applicant answer that question.
Yes, sir. Technically, if we had a 20-foot setback, we could build a small home with a garage, yes.
Single car.
And it's one that meets the, I mean, I think the other restriction was the 1,000 square foot HOA restriction. It gets you above the 1,000 foot threshold.
It would meet their criteria, yes.
Okay.
And bottom line on that particular question, it would mean a smaller house, smaller garage, and not what their intent is or what the area out there has already approved as far as their plans for their house.
Okay. Okay, that's all the questions I have from the applicant. Is there any other from the applicant, just by way of rebuttal or?
You know, the only thing I can say is as far as due diligence goes, we did do a lot of research on our property tax statement. It says it's zoned RA1. We looked into that. Didn't say anything about an OPR zone. Our contractor doing the septic has never even heard of one. He's been doing it for 50 years out there. So we thought our due diligence was good. We also applied for, like I said, the septic repair permit prior to purchasing the property, which again, all we thought was good due diligence. We installed or repaired the septic after we purchased the property. So we thought we were doing everything correct. I mean, we went to the DEQ, we had the fire district come out, the PUD. I mean, we did a lot of homework and no one knew about this. So it's not like we didn't try to pull a fast one or something else. We're just regular working people and we thought we were doing the right thing. So this was a big curveball to us. It's been a real hardship on our life, trust me. So, but it wasn't planned this way. It wasn't premeditated and we thought we were doing the right thing.
All right, thank you. I think that brings us to the point of back to staff. Staff, I don't have any additional questions for you, Ms. Henriksen, but is there any other comments you need to make in light of what was stated during the hearing?
Yes, the only thing I would like to address is that criterion 2.80103D as in David. And with regard to the hardship, the original hardship that started this whole train of events is a physical one related to the land, and that's the location of the water table on the property. And because of those water table levels, that's more or less dictated where the septic could go, and that reduced initially their development envelope on the property. And then following the installation of the septic, that development envelope was further restricted when the county adopted its definition of resource zone and included OPR that increased the setback on the west property line from 10 feet to 50 feet. And so I think everything ties back to that original hardship, which is associated with the land and the water tables. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That will conclude the hearing. Unless there's, I guess I will take this under advisement and issue a decision. I'll try to do that shortly. And unless there's anything else from staff, I think we can go off the record. It's 10:48.